The morning air at Fort Buchanan was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made every breath taste like salt and iron. The recruits stood in formation, rows of nervous faces, some sweating from fear, others from exhaustion. The sergeant's boots pounded across the gravel, his voice booming like thunder. Welcome to hell, ladies and gentlemen. For the next 12 weeks, this place will break you, or build you. In the back row, among the dozens of trembling recruits, stood a woman with calm gray eyes and a quiet posture. Her name tag read Reed. Nothing about her drew attention. Not her height, not her build, not even her silence. She stood still, hands locked behind her back, her breathing controlled, eyes fixed forward. To everyone else, she was just another trainee. When the sergeant yelled at her row to drop for push-ups, she obeyed instantly. Her movements were clean, perfect, without the jerky awkwardness that most beginners had. She didn't grunt or struggle. She just moved, steady and rhythmic, like a machine tuned for endurance. The recruit beside her, Morales, was already gasping for air by the 10th rep. He threw her a sideways glance. Hey, you been training for this or something? He panted. Reed didn't respond. She just kept going, each push-up precise, each breath measured. By the 50th push-up, half the recruits were flat on the ground, wheezing. Reed remained in position, still moving. When the sergeant called time, she quietly rose, dusted her palms, and stood back in line. Reed? The sergeant barked, narrowing his eyes. You think you're special? No, sir. Her voice was calm, even. Not defensive, not timid, just factual. He stared at her for a moment, trying to read her. Then he smirked. We'll see about that. That night, the barracks buzzed with chatter. New faces, new ranks, and the smell of sweat and nerves filled the air. Most recruits talked about their homes, their reasons for joining, to serve, to prove themselves, to find direction. Reed sat on her bunk quietly, polishing her boots, her posture perfectly straight even off duty. Her bunkmates found it strange, the way she said little, the way she seemed older somehow, though her records listed her at 27. Morales, the same recruit who had spoken to her during training, tried again. So Reed, where are you from? She looked up, polite but distant. Virginia. You got family in the service? A small pause. Then, something like that. He chuckled nervously. You're kinda mysterious, you know that? She smiled faintly. Only if you're looking too close. Over the next week, the differences became clearer. Reed was always up before the wake-up call. She ran her miles faster than anyone else, but never looked winded. During weapons training, her hands handled the M4 rifle with the kind of familiarity that made the instructor raise an eyebrow. Her aim was precise, every shot centered, every movement efficient. The others struggled to reload quickly, fumbling under pressure. Reed moved like she'd been doing this her entire life. Reed, the instructor said one afternoon, lowering his clipboard. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? Just practiced, sir. He stared at her. Practiced, huh? Yes, sir. He didn't press further, but his eyes followed her the rest of the day. When it came to endurance drills, Reed seemed tireless. She carried full packs over rocky hills without slowing down, her face composed while others stumbled and cursed. Some recruits began whispering. Who is she? One murmured. You think she was in ROTC or something? Maybe she's ex-police, another guessed. Morales, wiping sweat from his brow, said quietly, Nah, it's something else. You ever see someone move like that? She doesn't miss a step. They didn't know that Reed's mind was trained to calculate distances, angles, threats. Even in simple exercises, she was scanning, adjusting, controlling every heartbeat. It wasn't pride that drove her. It was instinct. Years of missions had conditioned her body to stay ready, always. But she didn't want to be recognized. Not yet. On the 5th day, the recruits were sent to the obstacle course, the most grueling test of physical and mental endurance. Walls, mud, rope climbs, barbed wire, water pits. It was designed to expose weakness. Reed waited her turn like everyone else. When her name was called, she started running low and fast. The sergeants watched as she scaled the wall in one fluid motion, barely using her knees for support. She rolled, landed, and sprinted toward the mud crawl, diving low, elbows and knees moving in sync. The entire platoon stopped to watch. She moved like someone who had done this under fire. "Holy hell," one of the instructors muttered. "That's not beginner movement." By the time she crossed the finish line, she wasn't even breathing heavily. The stopwatch showed a time that beat the record by 40 seconds. The recruits stared. Reed wiped the mud from her face, glanced around, and quietly joined the back of the line again, as if nothing had happened. That night, while the others laughed in the mess hall, Reed sat alone at the far table, eating silently. Morales walked over and dropped his tray across from her. "You know," he said, "you could at least act tired once in a while. You're making the rest of us look bad." Reed looked up, her eyes glinting faintly in the fluorescent light. "Not trying to." "Well, you're doing it anyway." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "People are talking. They think you've got military history. I mean, you don't move like the rest of us." She set her fork down gently. "You shouldn't listen to rumors, Morales. They slow you down." He blinked. "You talk like a drill sergeant. Maybe I've known a few." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're something else, Reed. You know that?" She smiled softly, but said nothing more. Later that night, when lights went out and the others snored softly around her, Reed lay awake staring at the ceiling. In her mind, memories played, not of training camps, but of missions in faraway deserts, of nights when silence meant survival. She remembered her SEAL team, the men who never doubted her, because she'd earned their respect the hard way. But that life was gone. This new assignment, posing as a trainee, was something different, classified. Her mission wasn't to prove anything. It was to observe, to see who had the instincts, the courage, the potential to be part of something bigger. She turned on her side, exhaled quietly, and whispered to herself, "Stay invisible. Just a trainee." Outside, rain began to fall, drumming softly against the barracks roof. Reed closed her eyes, her heartbeat steady as ever, calm, unshaken, waiting for the next test. No one knew that the quiet woman in bunk 19 wasn't a rookie at all. She was Lieutenant Morgan Reed, decorated Navy SEAL, one of the most elite operatives the country had ever produced, hiding in plain sight. And before long, one single move would expose everything she had tried to keep hidden. By the second week of training, the recruits at Fort Buchanan had started to settle into a rhythm, one that felt more like survival than structure. Every morning began before dawn, with the shrill blast of a whistle and the heavy thud of boots hitting the floor. The smell of gun oil and sweat filled the barracks before the first light of day ever touched the base. For most of them, it was chaos. But for Reed, it was peace. She moved with quiet precision, folding her blanket perfectly, tightening her laces evenly, adjusting her uniform until not a single thread was out of line. When others scrambled, she breathed steadily, her mind already in the day's flow. Years of conditioning had carved her habits deep into muscle and bone. She wasn't learning discipline, she was discipline. While the others grumbled about lack of sleep, she found calm in the repetition. The sound of boots marching, the cold air biting her lungs, the drill sergeant's voice cutting through the dawn, all of it reminded her of places she'd once been, places where precision had meant survival. By the time the platoon lined up for morning drills, Reed was already sweating lightly, her breathing slow and controlled. Sergeant Dorsey, a man built like a brick wall and twice as loud, paced in front of them. "You think this is hard?" he barked. "Wait till you meet the real world. Out there, you won't have me yelling to keep you alive." He stopped right in front of Reed. "You, Reed, you like running?" "Yes, sir." He narrowed his eyes. "Good, because today you'll lead the pack. Let's see if that quiet mouth of yours can keep the pace." The other recruits smirked. No one wanted to lead. The first runner always got punished for slowing down, and Reed had made herself a target by simply being too composed. "Front and center," Dorsey ordered. Reed stepped forward without hesitation. The whistle blew. 40 recruits launched into motion. The sound of pounding feet echoed against the asphalt track. Within minutes, the air filled with heavy breathing, coughing, and muttered curses. Reed ran ahead, steady, measured, her stride perfect, her posture upright. By the second mile, the pack was already breaking. Morales was near the front, gasping to stay beside her. "You don't even breathe heavy?" he managed between gulps of air. Reed didn't answer. Her focus was elsewhere, on her surroundings, on the sound of the wind, on the rhythm of her heartbeat. By the end of the run, she finished a full minute ahead of everyone. Dorsey's face was unreadable. "Reed," he said slowly, "you ever consider special ops?" A flicker crossed her expression, so brief no one caught it. "No, sir," she said quietly. He muttered, walking off, but his eyes lingered longer than before. That evening, while the others collapsed into their bunks, Reed stayed behind in the field. The sun had dipped low, washing the sky in orange and gold. She knelt by the training dummies, disassembling and reassembling her rifle in silence. Her fingers moved automatically, blind and sure. Click, slide, lock. She was halfway through her 5th round when she heard footsteps. "You ever stop working, Reed?" It was Morales again, hands in his pockets, hair still wet from the showers. "Shouldn't you be resting?" she asked without looking up. He shrugged. "Figured I'd see what makes the quiet ones tick." Reed smirked faintly. "Discipline makes everyone tick." "Yeah, but you're different," he said, sitting on the ground beside her. "You're not scared of anything, are you?" She paused, considering her answer. "Everyone's scared of something." Morales tilted his head. "So what scares you?" She looked at the horizon, where the last bit of sunlight bled into the trees. "Failure," she said softly. "Not the kind that hurts your pride, the kind that costs lives." Morales blinked, surprised. "That's deep for week 2. Reed gave a small smile and began reassembling the rifle again. "Go get some rest, Morales." He got up slowly, still watching her. "You know, one day you'll have to tell me who you really are." She didn't respond. The next morning brought weapons qualification day. Rows of rifles lined the range, and the recruits stood at attention. The air was filled with gunpowder and tension. The instructor, Chief Miller, was an ex-Marine with a reputation for being unforgiving. He walked down the line, eyeing the recruits like prey. "Each of you gets 10 shots, he announced. "I don't care if you've never fired before. You will hit something, or you'll be cleaning this range until your hands bleed." One by one, the recruits stepped forward. Misses, scattered hits, low scores. Then it was Reed's turn. She stepped up, calm as a shadow, adjusted her stance, took aim. The world around her fell silent. She exhaled slowly, finger tightening on the trigger. 10 shots. 10 perfect center hits. The other recruits gawked. Morales whispered, "No way." Chief Miller said nothing at first. He simply looked at her target, then at her, his expression shifting from disbelief to something like suspicion. "Reed," he said slowly, "you ever trained before?" "No, sir," she lied evenly. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, you just set the range record. Try not to make the rest look bad." Later that night, the whispers began again. "She's gotta be ex-military. No way she's new. Did you see her shoot? Maybe she's like undercover or something." The barracks hummed with speculation, but Reed ignored it all. She sat on her bunk, writing in a small, worn notebook. The handwriting was neat, the pages filled with short, coded notes, reminders, observations, fragments of things only she understood. Morales peeked over from his bunk. "You journaling your way to greatness?" She looked up, closing the notebook gently. "Something like that." He smiled. "Well, if they ever make a movie about this, you'll be the mysterious one in the background, watching everyone else panic." Reed chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." He grinned. "You should. Because when things go bad, and they will, I have a feeling everyone's going to look to you." She said nothing, but deep down, she knew he was right. By the end of the second week, even the instructors had started to notice something unusual. Reed's reports were clean, her record perfect, but her methods, too refined. The way she handled exhaustion, fear, and pressure, it wasn't the reaction of a beginner. One night, Sergeant Dorsey stood in the shadows of the range, watching her train alone. Her movements were too fluid, too deliberate. He narrowed his eyes. "Who are you, Reed?" he muttered to himself. She finished her last shot, disassembled her rifle, and walked past him without a word, as if she'd heard the question, but chose not to answer. When she returned to her bunk, she found an envelope under her pillow. No name, no seal, just one line typed neatly on a slip of paper inside. "The commander knows who you are. Stay sharp." Her pulse didn't quicken. Her expression didn't change. But inside, a switch flipped. Someone at Fort Buchanan had recognized her. She folded the note, slipped it into her pocket, and sat down quietly on her bed. Around her, the others slept soundly, unaware that the woman, lying a few feet away, wasn't just a trainee. She was a ghost from a classified past, one the U.S. Navy had buried deep. And now, someone had just dug her name back up. By the start of the third week, the atmosphere at Fort Buchanan had changed. Something about Reed had the whole platoon on edge. She never bragged, never showed off, yet somehow her name was on everyone's lips. Every perfect score, every flawless drill, every calm glance when others panicked. It all fed the growing mystery. The whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear what the range instructor said? She beat the record by 2 full seconds. No way a rookie does that. I'm telling you. She's not who she says she is." Even Sergeant Dorsey, who prided himself on breaking down every recruit, had stopped yelling at her. That, more than anything, stirred the rumor mill. Reed noticed the shift, of course. You couldn't survive as long as she had without noticing small changes. Glances that lasted a little too long. Conversations that stopped when she walked in. But she ignored it all. Every night after lights out, while others drifted into exhausted sleep, she trained quietly, controlled breathing, muscle tensing, endurance work. She couldn't afford to get soft. Not when someone at the base already knew who she was. That note still burned in her mind. The commander knows who you are. Stay sharp. She'd memorized every typeface, every detail of the paper, every subtle trace of scent. Whoever had sent it was careful, but not careful enough to hide from her instincts. She was being watched. On the morning of the 15th day, the recruits assembled on the field for hand-to-hand combat drills. This was the day everyone dreaded. Bruises, pain, humiliation, all in front of their peers. Sergeant Dorsey strutted across the training mats like a wolf preparing to feed. "Today," he shouted, "you'll learn one thing. Fear means nothing if you know how to fight." He clapped his hands. "Pair up." Reed ended up with Morales again. He smiled nervously, raising his fists. "Please go easy on me this time." "I'll try not to hurt your ego," she replied, deadpan. They squared off. Morales lunged clumsy, overconfident. Reed sidestepped, fluid as water, lightly tapping his shoulder before he even registered her move. The others laughed. "Come on, Morales." Someone shouted. "She's playing with you." He charged again, but Reed caught his wrist, twisted, and let him fall softly to the ground. Not hard enough to injure, but enough to make her point clear. Dorsey watched silently, arms folded. He'd seen good fighters before, but this was different. Reed's movements weren't learned here. They were ingrained, instinctual. That kind of control only came from real combat. He made a note on his clipboard. After the drills, as the recruits limped back toward the barracks, Morales jogged beside her. "Okay," he said, rubbing his shoulder. "You're officially terrifying." "Where'd you learn that wrist thing?" "Online video," she said with a faint smirk. "Yeah, right." He laughed, but it faded quickly. "You're really not going to tell me, are you?" She didn't answer. "Fine," he said finally. "But when I find out, I'm betting it's some superhero-level story." She smiled softly, but said nothing. That night, the barracks felt different. The recruits were restless, tension thick in the air. It wasn't just fatigue. It was curiosity. A few of them, led by a bold recruit named Harris, decided to dig deeper. "Let's check her file," Harris whispered. "See where she came from." Morales hesitated. "That's a bad idea." "Come on," Harris pressed. "You don't wonder who she is?" He did. Everyone did. So that night, after lights out, they slipped out quietly. Two shadows moving toward the admin office. The door was locked, but Harris had a bent pin and too much confidence. Within minutes, they were inside, the faint glow of a phone flashlight bouncing off steel cabinets. "Read, Morgan," Harris whispered, scanning the drawers. "Got it." He pulled out a thin file, surprisingly thin. Most recruits had pages of background checks, tests, and evaluations. Reed's was barely 5 sheets. The top page listed her birthplace, Virginia, and standard information. But the second page was half redacted. Thick black lines covered entire paragraphs. "Whoa," Morales muttered. "What the hell?" The third page was worse. The previous experience section was completely blacked out. "Redacted? For a trainee?" Harris whispered. "That's classified level stuff." "Put it back," Morales hissed. "Now." But before they could, the lights flickered on. Sergeant Dorsey stood at the door, arms crossed. "Gentlemen," he said coldly, "care to explain why you're snooping through government files?" Morales froze. Harris stammered something about curiosity. Dorsey's gaze dropped to the open file. His expression darkened. "You two just made a very serious mistake." He took the file, closed it, and dismissed them with a growl. "Out, now, before I make you run until sunrise." They fled. Dorsey stood alone in the office for a long moment, staring at the redacted pages. Then he sighed, closed the drawer, and locked it tight. The next morning, the recruits noticed Dorsey was quieter than usual. His voice still carried authority, but there was something behind it now, caution. He watched Reed carefully. When she caught his eye once, she knew. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Still, she kept her calm. During weapons maintenance drills, she worked efficiently, wordless. But she could feel the glances, the sideways looks, the curious eyes. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were constant background noise. She's got clearance. Redacted file, man. That's government stuff? You think she's like special forces? No way. Women aren't. Don't finish that sentence. Unless you want her to prove you wrong. That evening, while the rest of the recruits ate, Dorsey found her in the training yard, practicing strikes with a wooden dummy. He approached quietly, hands clasped behind his back. You don't sleep much, do you, Reed? She didn't stop. Enough to function, sir. He watched her movements for a moment. You've been through real combat training before. She froze mid-strike, just for half a second, then continued. Why do you say that? He stepped closer. Because I've seen the way you move. You anticipate attacks before they happen. You don't flinch when a shot fires. You never look afraid, not even when everyone else does. Finally, she turned to face him. Her expression was calm but unreadable. With respect, sir, she said evenly. I thought this was a place to learn discipline, not to question it. Dorsey held her gaze. For a moment, it was a silent standoff, soldier to soldier. Then he nodded slowly. You're right. It is. He turned to walk away but paused. For what it's worth, Reed. Whoever you are, you're not here by accident. Someone wanted you here, and I think we're all about to find out why. She watched him disappear into the shadows. Then she reached into her pocket, pulling out the folded note, the one that said, "The commander knows who you are." Her instincts flared. The whispers weren't just gossip anymore. The truth was circling her like wolves, closing in, piece by piece. She took a deep breath, folded the note again, and looked toward the distant horizon of the base, where tomorrow's drills would take place. She had survived worse storms. But this time, survival wouldn't be about staying hidden. It would be about deciding whether to keep pretending or to finally show them who she really was. The morning sun rose over Fort Buchanan like fire over steel, blinding, harsh, and unrelenting. The recruits were already sweating before the day even began. Today was different. The mood was sharp, electric. The challenge had been announced the night before. Combat Simulation Day. Rumor said this was when the instructors separated those who had potential from those who would wash out. But to Reed, it meant something else, risk. Because combat wasn't theory for her. It was memory. As the platoon assembled on the open training field, Sergeant Dorsey stood before them, his clipboard tucked under his arm. Listen up, he bellowed. Today you'll face real pressure, full contact scenarios, squad tactics, endurance under fire. Treat it like life or death, because out there it will be. He looked over the recruits. His gaze lingered on Reed for a second longer than necessary. Then he smirked. And to make this interesting, we'll mix it up. Each team will have to defend a point while being attacked by another. You lose focus, you lose fast. You follow me? Yes, sir. The recruits shouted in unison. Dorsey nodded. Good. Then let's see who can handle the heat. Reed's team, Morales, Harris, and 2 others, was assigned to the defense side first. Their territory was a small concrete bunker halfway up a hill. The attackers, led by the ever-boastful Corporal Henson, would try to storm it. The recruits were handed paintball rifles loaded with simulation rounds, enough sting to make you think twice about getting hit. Morales grinned nervously as he checked his weapon. You ready for this, mystery girl? Reed's lips curved faintly. Just stay behind cover. And don't try to be a hero. Hey, I'm always a hero. Exactly why I said that. He laughed, shaking his head. The whistle blew. The sound of simulated gunfire erupted through the air, loud pops echoing off the hills. Smoke grenades hissed, releasing thick plumes of white mist across the field. The attackers advanced fast and loud, shouting orders and firing rounds that splattered against the bunker walls. Reed crouched low behind a sandbag, eyes scanning the field through the haze. Her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat leveled out. Everything else fell away. She wasn't at Fort Buchanan anymore. She was back in Kandahar, or Mosul, or one of the nameless desert towns that had left scars on her body and her soul. Movement to her left. She tapped Morales on the shoulder and pointed. Two coming from the flank. He nodded, peeking out, just in time to get hit in the vest. "Oh, come on." He groaned, collapsing theatrically. "Stay down," Reed muttered, shifting position. Harris popped up to fire, but exposed too much of his shoulder. A round hit him square in the chest. "Hit! I'm out!" The rest of the team panicked. Reed moved. She didn't think. She reacted, fast, clean, efficient. Sliding from cover, she rolled across the ground, firing 3 perfect shots. Each one hit dead center on an attacker's vest. Pop, pop, pop. The other recruits froze. Even Henson, charging up the hill, hesitated when he saw how quickly his team was being picked apart. Reed reloaded smoothly, ducked behind a barrier, and adjusted her position. She wasn't supposed to know these tactics: bounding cover, lateral angles, suppression fire. But her body moved as if it had been doing it for years. In less than a minute, the attackers were all tagged out. The whistle blew again. Silence. Sergeant Dorsey stared at her from across the field. "Reed," he barked. Front and center. She jogged over, weapons slung over her shoulder, calm as ever. "What was that?" he demanded. "Defense, sir. Don't get smart with me. You moved like a ghost out there. Where'd you learn those tactics?" Reed's tone didn't waver. "Observation, sir." The rest of the recruits had gathered around, whispering. Morales, still grinning even with a bright pink splatter across his chest, muttered, "You see that?" She wiped them out in seconds. Henson wasn't grinning. He stepped forward, voice sharp. "No way that was observation. You're trained, Special Forces trained." Reed's jaw flexed slightly, but she stayed silent. Dorsey turned to Henson. "You got something to say, Corporal?" "Yeah, sir," Henson said, glaring at Reed. "I say she's no ordinary recruit. And if we're going to train like soldiers, we deserve to know who we're training with." The other recruits murmured in agreement. Reed's calm eyes swept across the group. Dozens of faces flushed with sweat and adrenaline, all staring at her, some curious, some suspicious, others almost afraid. For the first time since she arrived, she felt the weight of their stares. But before Dorsey could respond, a deep voice cut through the air. "That's enough." Every head turned. A tall man in a dark blue uniform approached from the edge of the field. The silver trident, pinned to his chest, caught the sunlight. The recruits immediately straightened. Even Dorsey stiffened. "Commander Briggs," he said, saluting. "Didn't expect you, sir." "I wasn't planning to visit," Briggs said coolly, eyes never leaving Reed. "But I heard something interesting was happening out here." He stopped a few feet away from her. "Reed." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Sir, you've been busy. Just following orders, sir." "Is that what we're calling it now?" Dorsey looked between them, confusion flickering across his face. "Sir, is there something?" Briggs raised a hand, silencing him. Then he looked back at Reed. "You can drop the act now, Lieutenant." Gasps rippled through the recruits. "Lieutenant?" Morales whispered. Reed said nothing. Her eyes stayed locked on Briggs, but her face, normally unreadable, tightened for a moment. Briggs continued, voice steady. "Lieutenant Morgan Reed, United States Navy SEALs. Class 294. 5 tours overseas. One of the best operators I've ever commanded. The field went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Every recruit stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Morales finally exhaled. Holy. Henson looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Dorsey's mouth opened, then closed. Sir, with respect, why is a SEAL? She was sent here, Briggs interrupted, on direct orders to assess the next generation of recruits. To see how they lead, how they break, how they recover. He turned to the platoon. And from what I've seen today, most of you still have a long way to go. No one spoke. Reed finally broke her silence. Sir, with all due respect, this wasn't the way to. Briggs's tone softened. You didn't have a choice. They were bound to find out sooner or later. He gave her a small nod, something between respect and apology. Then he looked at the recruits one last time. Consider yourselves lucky. You've been training alongside a legend. Remember that. Then he walked off, his boots crunching over the gravel, leaving stunned silence in his wake. No one moved for a long time. Finally, Morales turned toward her. You're a SEAL? Reed looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Was. He let out a low whistle. Guess that explains everything. Harris spoke up. Why didn't you tell us? Because this wasn't about me, she said simply. It was about you, all of you, learning to lead under pressure. She started to walk away, but Dorsey called out, Reed, whatever your rank is now. She stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you just set a new standard around here. Reed nodded once. Then let's make sure they meet it. As she walked off the field, the recruit's eyes followed her, not with suspicion this time, but with awe. For the first time, they understood who she really was. And deep down, Reed knew this was only the beginning. Because once her identity was exposed, the mission, the real mission, was about to change. The base had barely returned to routine after the chaos of the combat simulation. When the black SUV appeared on the gravel road. Its tires crunched sharply over the gravel, announcing its presence like a drumbeat. The recruits, still buzzing with shock over Reed's exposure, froze as the vehicle came to a halt. From the SUV stepped Commander Briggs, tall, imposing, his eyes hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses. Even at a distance, he radiated authority, the kind that made men and women alike straighten instinctively. The recruits instinctively snapped to attention, but Reed remained calm, her stance relaxed yet alert. She had faced more dangerous men than Briggs, in desert heat and urban chaos, and yet the gravity of this moment was different. Briggs scanned the field, his gaze sweeping over the platoon. Then, without ceremony, he pointed to Reed. Reed, he said, voice calm but cutting. She saluted automatically. Sir. Briggs walked toward her with measured steps, every recruit watching intently. You've been busy, he said, nodding toward the training field where her team had defended the bunker flawlessly the day before. Just following orders, sir, she replied, her voice steady. He stopped a few feet away, lowering his sunglasses. For a brief moment, his expression softened. I didn't expect to find you here like this. I didn't expect anyone to notice. Reed's jaw tightened imperceptibly. I've always been able to stay under the radar, sir. Briggs's eyes flickered with recognition. I know. A hush fell over the recruits. Nobody moved. They had watched her perform like a phantom, but now, Briggs's words confirmed what they had only begun to suspect. Reed wasn't just a trainee. She's a SEAL, Morales whispered to Harris. A real one. Harris's jaw dropped. No way. Briggs finally turned his attention to the entire platoon. Everyone, he said, you've been training alongside someone extraordinary. You've seen her discipline, her composure, and her capability. What you didn't know is that this wasn't a standard assignment for her. She was sent here with a mission to assess potential, leadership, and resilience under pressure. The recruits absorbed the words in stunned silence. "Commander," Sergeant Dorsey said, stepping forward, "with respect, how should we treat her now? Is she part of the team officially?" Briggs shook his head slowly. "She's still a trainee here, technically. But from now on, she's also a mentor, quietly guiding the next generation. You will respect her authority, but you will also learn from her example." That's the arrangement. The field remained quiet. Even the most vocal recruits had nothing to say. Reed took a step forward. "Sir, the mission here isn't about me. It's about seeing who has what it takes to survive and lead." "That hasn't changed." Briggs nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Exactly. But the difference now is that everyone knows you're no ordinary recruit. They've seen what you can do, and they will expect that excellence every day." She nodded once. "Understood, sir." Briggs looked around the field, letting his gaze linger on each recruit. "Consider this a lesson in humility. You are being evaluated not just for physical skill, but for mental resilience. And you've just witnessed the standard. The bar has been set." Then Briggs turned back to Reed. "There's one more thing." The recruits leaned forward instinctively, curious and tense. Briggs's tone dropped slightly, confidential. "Your next assignment will require discretion and precision. You will not just observe, you will act when necessary. And your role here will be critical to the mission I'm about to outline." Reed's expression remained unreadable, but inside, a surge of adrenaline flared. She had anticipated this moment, but not so soon, not with the whole platoon watching. "Yes, sir," she replied. Briggs's eyes scanned the field one final time. "Do not disappoint." With that, he turned sharply and walked back toward the SUV, leaving the field in a charged silence. The recruits stared after him, mouths slightly agape. Morales finally broke the silence. I can't believe this is real. A Navy SEAL in our platoon, and we had no idea?" Harris shook his head slowly. "And Commander Briggs trusts her too." "What exactly?" "She's not just training us," Morales said, comprehension dawning. "She's running the show without anyone realizing it." Reed, standing apart from the group, watched the recruits murmur among themselves. She knew some were skeptical, others intimidated, and a few were outright scared. But she also knew that this exposure was necessary. It would push them to their limits and reveal who was truly ready for what lay ahead. Later that evening, in the quiet of the barracks, Reed and Dorsey met privately. "Sir," Reed said, "I didn't expect the commander to appear so soon. It's going to change everything here." Dorsey nodded slowly. "It already has. The recruits. They respect you now, sure, but they're also terrified. You're a legend to them, and legends make people nervous." "I've trained people like this before," Reed replied. "Fear is part of the process. It's how they learn." "You're not like anyone I've ever met," Dorsey said quietly. "I've seen a lot of good fighters, but you're different. You don't just act. You anticipate. You calculate. You control every variable. That's what makes you a SEAL." Reed's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's the point. Discipline and composure are contagious if used correctly. If I show them that panic gets results, we fail. If I show them control, they can achieve more than they think possible." Dorsey studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Just be careful. You're not invisible anymore. Everyone knows you're exceptional. Some won't like it." "I can handle it," Reed said simply. That night, she returned to her bunk and pulled out the small, redacted note that had been left under her pillow weeks ago. "The commander knows who you are. Stay sharp." She folded it neatly and placed it in her pocket. Now, after Briggs's visit, she knew that the mission was evolving. She was no longer merely observing. She was guiding, shaping, and when necessary, intervening. Her mind replayed every drill, every combat simulation, every glance from the recruits who had tried to gauge her abilities. Some had already guessed, others were oblivious. But soon, every action, every decision she made would be under scrutiny. And for the first time, Reed allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had spent years mastering invisibility in chaos, but now, standing in full view of the platoon and the commander, she realized something important. Sometimes, being seen was just as powerful as staying hidden. Outside, the base settled into quiet night, the distant hum of generators and the rustle of leaves the only sounds. But inside Reed, the gears were already turning, planning, calculating, preparing for what would come next. Because the next phase of her mission wasn't training anymore. It was leadership. And she would prove, in ways no one could doubt, that her single move, her skill, her instinct, her discipline, was more than enough to command respect. The day dawned gray, the sky heavy with low clouds, threatening rain. The air at Fort Buchanan was thick with anticipation. Word had spread that today would not be a standard drill. Today would be a true test of stamina, strategy, and mental endurance. The recruits gathered in formation, muscles tense, faces tight with nervous energy. Even those who had performed well in previous exercises felt the weight of expectation. Whispers rippled through the group. "She's going to crush us again. Do you think she's human? I just hope I survive the day." Reed stood calmly in the back row, posture perfect, eyes scanning every detail. Her gray eyes flicked over the field, muddy hills, water obstacles, climbing walls, and mock urban structures. She noted every angle, every potential hazard, every element that could test the recruit's limits. For her, the test wasn't just physical. It was tactical, mental, psychological. And she was ready. Sergeant Dorsey blew the whistle sharply, signaling the start. "Today," he roared, "you will face the ultimate endurance challenge. Obstacle course, urban combat scenarios, water crossings, and team missions. You will be pushed beyond your limits. Anyone who falls behind will be left behind." The recruits erupted into movement. Mud splashed, boots churned dirt, water sprayed, and yells of exertion filled the air. Reed moved with smooth efficiency, her every action precise. She didn't rush, she didn't stumble, she didn't falter. Others strained, struggled, and cursed, but she glided through obstacles with a calm focus that made her seem untouchable. The first obstacle was a high wall. Recruits scrambled, grunting and clawing for purchase. Some fell, others barely made it over. Reed approached with ease. In one fluid motion, she jumped, grabbed the top, swung her leg over, and landed silently on the other side. The instructors watching from the sidelines muttered to one another. "Look at her form. That's not beginner technique. Not human." Morale struggled behind her, gasping. "How does she do that?" He panted. "Control," Reed said over her shoulder, almost as if it were obvious. Morales could only shake his head. Next came the mud crawl, a narrow trench filled with water, rocks, and barbed wire. The recruits lowered themselves painfully under the wires, dragging their bodies through muck and cold water. Reed dropped in with barely a splash, her movements silent, efficient, and controlled. A recruit behind her slipped, caught on the wire, yelping in frustration. Reed glanced back, reached a hand, and pulled him through smoothly. Not a single ounce of strength wasted. "You okay?" she asked, voice calm, almost soothing. He nodded, stunned. "Yeah?" "Thanks," Reed didn't reply. She was already moving forward. The next challenge was the urban combat simulation. Smoke filled the air. Loud bangs echoed off the walls. Teams were instructed to navigate through mock buildings, clearing rooms while avoiding hostiles. Reed's team consisted of Morales, Harris, and 2 others. She immediately took control, issuing silent, precise signals. A raised hand here, a nod there. Every movement was calculated. "Left corridor," she whispered, pointing. "Stay low. Cover each other." Her voice was calm, authoritative, unshakable. The team followed instinctively. In one room, a recruit froze, panic overtaking him. Reed moved in, guiding him with a steady hand, whispering instructions. They cleared the room without incident. Outside, Sergeant Dorsey and the other instructors watched in disbelief. Reed wasn't just performing. She was teaching, correcting, leading, and protecting simultaneously. By midday, the recruits were exhausted. Mud caked on their uniforms, blisters had formed, and their lungs burned. Reed remained steady, though sweat glistened on her brow. She carried her gear efficiently, her every motion conserving energy while maximizing effect. Then came the water crossing, a cold, fast-moving stream with slippery rocks. Most recruits hesitated, afraid of the current. "Step carefully," Reed instructed. "Use your core. Find balance points. Move as a unit." She demonstrated first, sliding over the rocks with controlled precision. Each recruit followed, some faltering, but none falling. Reed's presence reassured them. Her calm competence was contagious. Morales, exhausted, whispered, "I can't believe how steady you are." "Focus," she replied softly. "Panic wastes energy." The final segment was a team extraction drill. The recruits had to carry a simulated casualty on a stretcher while evading ambush from instructors acting as hostiles. Most teams fell apart under pressure, dropping the stretcher, losing their rhythm, yelling at each other. Reed's team moved seamlessly. She coordinated their steps, adjusted their path in real time, and even intercepted a hostile trying to tag Morales, neutralizing the threat with a controlled maneuver that left the instructor nodding in impressed acknowledgement. By the time they crossed the finish line, they were the last standing team still fully intact. The rest of the platoon stumbled in moments later, exhausted, mud-streaked, and gasping for breath. Sergeant Dorsey blew the whistle and approached Reed's team. "You set a new record," he admitted, voice low. "All of you. But especially you, Reed. You didn't just survive. You commanded. You led under extreme pressure." Reed nodded once. "The goal was to test them, sir." "Not me." "Still," Dorsey said, watching her closely, "you've changed the game here. Everyone knows the standard now. And the standard is terrifying." Morales wiped mud from his face, still breathing heavily. "Lieutenant, I mean, Reed, you didn't just set a record. You made us all feel like we're amateurs." Reed glanced at him, calm but firm. "Then learn from it. That's the point." Harris muttered under his breath, almost reverently, "I don't think anyone's going to forget this day." After the drills, the recruits returned to the barracks. They were quiet, exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally. But something had shifted. Fear had been replaced with respect, awe, and a subtle understanding that Reed wasn't just a colleague. She was a benchmark, a teacher, and a force to be reckoned with. Reed, sitting on her bunk quietly, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The test had proven more than her skill. It had proven the power of composure, leadership, and calculated precision. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the barracks roof. The recruits slept, some dreaming of failure, some dreaming of rising to meet the standard Reed had set. And Red? She was already planning the next phase, the next challenge, the next mission. Because the ultimate test wasn't just physical endurance or combat skill. It was shaping the next generation, preparing them for the day when the stakes would be far higher than any drill, any simulation, or any controlled environment. And she was ready. The morning sun sliced through the barracks windows in sharp beams, illuminating mud-caked boots and sweat-streaked faces of the recruits. Their bodies ached, muscles still recovering from the ultimate endurance challenge. Yet the moment they stepped onto the field, there was no hesitation, not with Reed present. The shift had begun. Where fear and awe had once ruled, a new energy pulsed among the recruits. Expectation, discipline, and a quiet determination to rise to Reed's standard. She arrived first at the training field, adjusting her uniform and checking her gear with flawless precision. She wasn't just a participant anymore. She was orchestrating every move, every drill, every decision. Sergeant Dorsey approached her quietly, his voice lowered. "You've changed everything, Reed," he said. "The platoon listens to you now. They follow instinctively." She didn't look up. Good. Leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being effective. Dorsey nodded slowly, his respect growing. "I can see that. But some of them are still hesitant. It'll take time for them to fully trust you." Reed's gray eyes scanned the approaching recruits. "Time isn't luxury we have. They need to trust me now, or they'll fail when it counts." The first exercise of the day was a simulated tactical infiltration. The goal: navigate through an urban mock-up filled with obstacles, hostile instructors, and unpredictable variables. Teams had to operate under silence, communication limited to hand signals and code phrases. Reed called her team together, crouching low to speak in hushed tones. "Remember," she said, "coordination beats speed. Control beats panic. Eyes open, mind sharp. We move as one unit." Morales, still recovering from the previous day's exhaustion, blinked at her. "You make it sound almost easy." Reed allowed a faint smile. "It's not easy. But it's simple if you understand the rules. Follow them. Trust me." Her team nodded. Even Harris, typically nervous, straightened, absorbing her calm authority. The whistle blew. The team moved through corridors and stairwells with seamless coordination. Reed's hand signals were precise, her tactical awareness unmatched. At a corner, a hostile instructor stepped out, firearm raised. Reed froze for half a heartbeat, calculating angles, assessing threat, timing movements, then executed a flawless maneuver. She sidestepped, neutralized the threat with a controlled push, and signaled her team forward without a word. Morales whispered, awestruck. "How does she do that every time?" Harris shook his head. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone move like her. Not even in simulations." Halfway through the exercise, disaster struck. One of the recruits panicked during a simulated ambush, dropping his weapon and freezing. Reed noticed instantly. She moved swiftly, placing herself between him and the hostile, her movements fluid and precise. "Breathe. Follow my lead," she instructed, voice steady and commanding. Within seconds, she had guided him through the ambush, neutralized the simulated threat, and had him back in formation. The other recruits, watching this, began to whisper among themselves. Fear was replaced with trust. For the first time, they weren't just following orders. They were learning to rely on her instincts, understanding that her calm could save lives. The next phase was a night navigation drill. The platoon had to move silently through dense woods, relying on stealth, memory, and teamwork. Visibility was low, the terrain unforgiving, and the recruits' fatigue evident. Reed led the team, mapping the safest path with her eyes alone. Her hand signals were subtle, but unmistakable. She stopped suddenly at a ridge, assessing the position. "Hostiles ahead," she whispered. "Two possible paths. Right is faster but exposed. Left is slower but covered. We take left. Stay silent." Morales looked at her skeptically. "You sure?" "I've been in worse," she replied softly. "Follow my lead." Every recruit hesitated for a moment, then moved as a unit under her direction. They navigated the ridge without incident, unseen, unheard. The discipline was palpable. By the time they reached the extraction point, the team was exhausted but intact. No one had faltered. No one had panicked. Reed had transformed a potentially disastrous exercise into a controlled success. The day ended with debriefing. Sergeant Dorsey addressed the group, a rare smile on his face. "You've just experienced leadership at its finest," he said, glancing at Reed. "Not command, leadership. Someone who guides, protects, and executes simultaneously. Learn from her." Morales raised his hand, hesitant. "Sergeant, can I ask her a question?" Dorsey nodded. "Make it quick. Reed, how do you stay so calm, even when everything is falling apart?" Reed studied him for a long moment, then replied simply, "Control your mind, and your body will follow. Fear is only useful if it's directed. Otherwise, it's poison. Learn to harness it." The recruits absorbed her words, quiet and reverent. Harris muttered under his breath, "I don't think anyone's ever spoken to me like that before." That night, Reed returned to her bunk, exhausted but satisfied. She sat on her bed, reviewing notes from the day. Every movement, every error, every reaction. She knew the mission wasn't over. Leadership wasn't a one-time display. It was a daily grind, a constant balancing act between teaching, controlling, and guiding. She pulled out the small folded note from the commander. "The commander knows who you are. Stay sharp." The words reminded her of the larger picture. Her presence at Fort Buchanan wasn't just about training recruits. It was about shaping a generation capable of handling pressure, making split-second decisions, and trusting instincts in life-or-death scenarios. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window, a soothing rhythm against the quiet hum of the base. Inside, Reed's mind was already planning tomorrow's exercise, anticipating every variable, every weakness, every opportunity for growth. She knew one thing: the ultimate test wasn't behind her, it was ahead. Because leadership was more than skill. It was influence, strategy, and the courage to act when others hesitated. And Reed had all three. The morning air at Fort Buchanan was crisp, almost electric, as the platoon assembled on the training field. The clouds hung low, reflecting the tension that pulsed among the recruits. Today wasn't just another exercise. It was the culmination of weeks of drills, endurance tests, and leadership challenges. Today was the day that would separate true leaders from the rest. Reed stood at the front, eyes scanning the field with the quiet intensity that had become familiar to everyone. The recruits, some still awed by her previous displays, now approached with respect, determination, and the faint trace of fear that comes from knowing someone is truly exceptional. Sergeant Dorsey stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Today, you will face the final simulation. Urban combat, hostage extraction, and extraction under live fire simulation. Every skill you've learned will be tested. Fail, and you fail as a team. Succeed, and you prove you are ready for anything." He turned his gaze to Reed. "Lieutenant Reed, you lead your team. Command them. Guide them. Do what you've been showing us all these weeks." Reed's eyes swept over her team, Morales, Harris, and the others. No words were needed. They understood the stakes. "Move out," she said calmly, her voice carrying authority and reassurance. The field was chaos in motion. Smoke bombs hissed, loud bangs simulated gunfire. and instructors playing hostiles darted through the mock urban environment. Recruits shouted commands, ducked behind cover, and moved erratically. But Reed's team moved with fluid precision. She guided them with subtle hand signals, whispered instructions, and sharp glances. Every decision was instantaneous. Every calculation was deliberate. She anticipated the hostiles' movements before they appeared, directing her team to safe angles, suppressive fire, and strategic cover. Morales, exhausted but determined, kept pace. Reed, how are you seeing all of this? Reed didn't answer directly. Her focus was absolute. She moved as if she could predict every variable, her body and mind perfectly synchronized. Harris, usually nervous, found himself trusting her instinct completely. For the first time, he wasn't second-guessing. He was following, fully, without hesitation. Midway through the simulation, the team reached the hostage, a mannequin positioned on a balcony in the center of a simulated urban compound. A group of instructors converged from multiple angles, attempting to force the team back. Reed assessed the situation quickly. She noted the elevations, the angles of fire, and the paths of approach. Morales, cover left flank. Harris, suppress right. I'll move to the hostage. Wait for my signal. Her voice was calm, steady, unwavering. The team executed perfectly. Morales's rounds pinned the hostiles back. Harris covered the right with accurate, controlled bursts. Reed moved silently, fluidly, reaching the hostage. She secured the mannequin and signaled the team. Extraction, move. The path out was narrow, treacherous, with obstacles and simulated enemy fire. But Reed's team moved as one unit, guided entirely by her leadership. Every stumble was corrected. Every hesitation anticipated. At one point, an instructor rushed from a side alley, aiming directly at Morales. Reed's reflexes were instantaneous. She intercepted, pushing Morales aside and neutralizing the threat with a precise maneuver. Not a hint of panic crossed her face. The rest of the team followed her, adrenaline coursing, nerves taut but guided by Reed's control. Her calm had become contagious, her authority absolute. They reached the extraction point without incident, the first team to do so in the history of Fort Buchanan's final simulation. The field was silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the distant rumble of the storm clouds gathering overhead. Sergeant Dorsey stepped forward, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. Reed, you've done it. Not only did you complete the simulation flawlessly, but your team. They performed at levels I've never seen before. You've changed the way we train. Morales and Harris looked at Reed with unspoken gratitude and respect. We couldn't have done it without you, Morales admitted, voice raw from exertion. Reed shook her head. You did it yourselves. I just guided the way. Leadership isn't about doing everything. It's about showing others how to be their best. Later, after the simulation was debriefed, Commander Briggs returned to the field. His presence drew immediate attention. Even Dorsey's normally unshakable composure seemed tempered by Briggs's authority. Reed, Briggs said, voice calm but commanding, I've been watching. And I have to say, you've exceeded every expectation. Not just as a SEAL, but as a leader. You've taken a group of raw recruits and forged them into a team capable of executing high-stakes operations flawlessly. Reed acknowledged him with a formal nod. Thank you, sir. It was the goal, sir. Briggs's eyes scanned the recruits. And for the rest of you, observe, learn, remember the standard she has set. Leadership, discipline, and composure are not optional. They are what separate success from failure in the field. He looked back at Reed. Your mission here is complete, but your legacy will remain. You've changed this platoon. You've changed the way they think, act, and respond under pressure. Reed allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. That was the plan, sir. As the storm finally broke, rain falling in heavy sheets over Fort Buchanan, the recruits gathered under the shelter of the barracks, still talking in hushed, reverent tones about the day's events. Morales shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe we just followed a SEAL through that entire exercise. She made it look effortless, Harris added, and she taught us without saying much. Every move, every instruction. It was like watching a master at work. Reed, standing quietly nearby, watched them. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The respect, understanding, and trust she had earned spoke for her. For the first time, she felt a sense of closure. The mission, training, assessing, leading was complete, and the platoon had grown stronger because of it. That evening, as the recruits settled into their bunks, Reed sat alone, reviewing the last week's events in her mind. She had maintained her cover, demonstrated her skills, and shaped a team capable of extraordinary performance. She reached into her pocket, feeling the familiar fold of the commander's note. The commander knows who you are. Stay sharp. She smiled faintly. The note had been a reminder, a warning, and a guiding principle. But now, she understood its deeper meaning. Her mission wasn't just about action, it was about impact, influence, and leaving a legacy that outlasted her presence. Tomorrow, she would leave Fort Buchanan. The recruits would continue to train, now guided by the standards she had set. But the mark she left, precision, discipline, calm under pressure, would remain. Because being a SEAL wasn't just about what you could do alone. It was about shaping others, teaching them, and leading when it mattered most. And in that respect, Reed had completed her final move perfectly. The final image lingers. Reed walking toward the base gates, rain cascading over her, boots heavy with mud and purpose. Behind her, the recruits watch, a mix of awe and admiration etched into every face. Somewhere in the distance, Commander Briggs nods subtly, acknowledging a mission accomplished beyond expectations. Reed's shadow stretches long across the ground, a symbol not just of skill, but of leadership, resilience, and the power of one person to transform those around them. The story ends, but her impact echoes.